For 23 straight Christmases, my father somehow forgot to buy me a present. There was always an excuse. Money was tight. He got busy. Maybe next year. Meanwhile, my brother opened piles of expensive gifts every December morning. I eventually stopped expecting anything at all. Then, years later, I bought my dream mansion without asking my family for a single dollar. That's when my parents suddenly remembered I existed. One Saturday morning, they arrived with a locksmith, a moving truck, and paperwork claiming my house belonged to them. My father smiled and said, "You can't stop us." I smiled back because I'd been expecting them. My name is Olivia Brooks, and I'm 35 years old. If you ask me what Christmas looked like growing up, I won't remember the decorations or the music first. I'll remember watching my younger brother tear through mountains of presents while I quietly smiled beside an empty space with my name on it. Every year, my father had an excuse. "We'll make it up to you later." "I thought your mother bought something." "Money's been tight." The excuses changed. The outcome never did. The strange part was that money wasn't actually the problem. Somehow there was always enough for my brother's newest gaming system, bicycle, or designer sneakers. My mother would notice my disappointment, squeeze my shoulder, and whisper, "Don't ruin Christmas. Your father has a lot on his mind." Eventually, I stopped expecting anything. Instead of waiting for someone else to believe in me, I focused on believing in myself. I studied hard, earned scholarships, graduated without student debt, and slowly built a career investing in neglected properties. One renovation became 3. 3 became 12. Years of patience, long nights, and careful planning finally allowed me to purchase something I dreamed about since childhood. A beautiful historic mansion on the edge of town. I didn't post photos online. I didn't announce it to my relatives. In fact, I intentionally kept the purchase quiet because I wanted my new home to be a place of peace, not attention. For nearly 2 months, no one in my family even knew I'd moved. Then, one afternoon my phone rang. Dad flashed across the screen. He hadn't called me in almost 6 months. I answered with cautious optimism. His first question wasn't, "How have you been?" It was, "So, I hear you bought quite a house." For the next few days, my father called almost every evening. That alone felt strange. For years, I had been the one reaching out first on birthdays, holidays, or simply to ask how everyone was doing. Most conversations lasted less than 5 minutes before Dad found an excuse to hang up. Now he suddenly had plenty of time. "So," he said during one call, "when are you going to invite us over?" I smiled politely, even though he couldn't see it. "I'm still unpacking." "No rush," he replied. "We're family." A week later, my mother called. "I've been looking at pictures of old mansions," she said casually. "Those homes are far too much for one person. You'll need help taking care of a place that big." "I've got everything under control," I answered. She laughed. "You've always been so independent." The compliment didn't sound like one. It sounded like a complaint. Then my younger brother, Ryan, texted me. "You know, Mom and Dad deserve to enjoy a place like that too. Families should share blessings." I stared at the message for several seconds before putting my phone away. Over the following weeks, the questions became oddly specific. Is the mortgage paid off? Whose name is on the deed? Did you buy it through your company or personally? Do you have extra bedrooms? None of those questions sounded casual anymore. They sounded calculated. Instead of arguing, I called the attorney who had handled the purchase. After listening carefully, she gave me simple advice. Keep copies of every message. Save every voicemail. And make sure your security cameras are recording properly. I followed every recommendation without telling my family. If I was wrong, I'd simply have better records. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't interested in visiting my new home. They were interested in claiming a place inside it. 3 Saturdays later, my security app buzzed just after 9 in the morning. I glanced at my phone, expecting to see a package delivery. Instead, I saw 2 familiar cars pulling into my driveway. My stomach tightened. Dad climbed out first. Mom followed behind him. Ryan stepped out of the second vehicle, looking uncertain. Then another van pulled in. The side of it read, "Licensed Locksmith Services." Behind it came a small moving truck. I stared at the screen. unable to believe what I was seeing. Dad marched confidently toward my front door, while the locksmith carried a toolbox. I opened the door before anyone had a chance to knock. "Good morning," I said calmly. Dad smiled, as though this were a friendly visit. "There you are." He held up a folder. "We've brought the paperwork." I didn't take it. "What paperwork?" "The agreement that proves this house belongs to the family now," he replied. "It's only fair. A place this large should be shared." I kept my voice steady. "Dad, this home belongs to me. You're not coming inside." His smile disappeared. "Don't make this difficult." He turned toward the locksmith. "Go ahead and change the locks." The locksmith hesitated. He looked at me, then back at my father. "Sir," he said carefully, "before I do anything, I need confirmation from the legal property owner." Dad waved the folder impatiently. "I've already got the documents." Without raising my voice, I stepped back into the entryway and used my phone to call the local non-emergency police line. I calmly explained that several people were attempting to gain access to my home without my permission and that a disagreement over property ownership had developed. Within minutes, a patrol unit was on its way. The neighbors had begun noticing the commotion. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. The locksmith quietly closed his toolbox and waited. Dad folded his arms confidently. He seemed certain the paperwork in his hands would settle everything. I was equally certain it wouldn't. The first patrol car arrived less than 10 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out calmly and approached the driveway. One greeted everyone before asking the same question he probably asked hundreds of times each year. "Who is the legal owner of the property?" Before I could answer, Dad stepped forward and handed over his folder. "Officer, this is a family misunderstanding," he said confidently. "We've got paperwork showing we're entitled to live here." The officer accepted the documents without comment. Then he turned to me. "Ma'am," I invited him onto the front porch and handed him a neatly organized binder my attorney had helped me prepare weeks earlier. Inside were copies of the recorded deed, the closing documents, mortgage records showing the loan had already been satisfied, property tax receipts, and a timeline of every text message and voicemail my parents had sent since learning about the mansion. I also showed him live footage from my security cameras documenting everyone arriving together, including the locksmith and moving truck. The officer reviewed both sets of documents carefully. After several minutes, he looked toward the locksmith. "Did anyone tell you who owned this house before you accepted the job?" The locksmith shook his head. "I was told the family had permission to change the locks. Once I realized the homeowner objected, I stopped immediately." The officer nodded. "That was the right decision." Ryan's expression changed. He looked from my binder to Dad's folder. "Dad," he said quietly, "you told me Olivia had already agreed." Dad didn't answer. Mom stepped forward instead. "She wouldn't really keep her own family outside, would she?" I met her eyes. "I never kept anyone outside. I simply refused to let someone walk in without my permission." The officer closed both folders and spoke respectfully. "Based on the verified ownership records, Ms. Brooks is the legal owner of this property. She decides who enters." For the first time that morning, my father's confidence disappeared. The papers in his hands suddenly carried far less weight than the truth. 3 days after the incident, my father called and asked if we could meet somewhere private. Not at my house. Not at his. A quiet coffee shop halfway between us. I almost said no, but after thinking about it, I agreed. When I arrived, he was already sitting in the corner, stirring a cup of coffee he clearly hadn't touched. He looked older than I remembered. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "I handled things badly. I waited. When you and Ryan were growing up, I convinced myself that he needed more attention because he was supposed to carry on the family name. I kept telling myself you'd be fine because you were independent." I stared at him. "So, every Christmas, every birthday, every forgotten promise, that was your reasoning?" He lowered his eyes. "I thought you were stronger." A small, sad smile crossed my face. "Strength isn't something children are born with, Dad. Sometimes it's something they're forced to build because no one shows up for them." He looked genuinely ashamed. "I never meant to make you feel unloved. You didn't have to mean it." I spoke calmly. You did it anyway. Images I hadn't thought about in years drifted through my mind. Watching Ryan unwrap a new bicycle while I thanked Mom for a pair of socks. Pretending forgotten birthdays didn't bother me. Waiting by the window one Christmas Eve because Dad had promised we'd decorate the tree together, only to hear him say he'd been too busy. Those weren't isolated memories. They were my childhood. Dad rubbed his forehead. I can't change any of that. No, I said softly. You can't. He nodded slowly. I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at him for a long moment. I forgive you because I don't want to carry this hurt forever. His eyes filled with relief. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I stood, picked up my coat, and smiled gently. I've finally built a home where everyone feels remembered. Then I walked away, determined never to spend another Christmas hoping someone would choose me first. The months that followed were quieter than I expected. After everything that happened, I made a promise to myself. I would stop spending energy trying to earn love from people who had already decided how much they were willing to give. Instead, I focused on the home I'd worked so hard to build. That first Christmas in the mansion, I didn't decorate it to impress anyone. I decorated it to create the kind of memories I'd always wished for as a little girl. I invited close friends, neighbors, and several local families who couldn't travel home for the holidays. The dining room that once seemed far too large quickly filled with laughter, homemade food, and conversations that lasted long after dessert. No one compared gifts. No one kept score. Everyone simply enjoyed being together. As I watched children excitedly hang ornaments on the enormous tree in the foyer, I realized something that had taken me 35 years to understand. A house becomes a home because of the people who make others feel welcome inside it. Not because of its size. Not because of its price. My father's approval had once felt priceless. Now it no longer defined me. I had finally built something far more valuable than a mansion. I had built a place where no one would ever feel forgotten the way I once had. The following Christmas, I stood in the foyer of my mansion and watched friends, neighbors, and children fill every room with laughter. There were wrapped presents beneath the tree, cookies cooling in the kitchen, and music drifting through the halls. For the first time in my life, Christmas didn't remind me of what I had missed. It reminded me of what I had built. Looking around, I realized my father had forgotten me for years. But in trying to take my home, he accidentally gave me something far greater. The courage to stop chasing acceptance, and the freedom to create a family where no one was overlooked, forgotten, or left behind. That became the greatest Christmas gift I ever received.